you know how in Jamaica we say pressure bust pipe.
Mm.
And one day it was just that. And I had enough.
Pipes
And I
bust.
yeah, pipe bust. And I just started bawling, which was so different from what the people who I worked with, they were mortified and terrified because they didn't know what was happening.
Right.
But I think people don't understand that you build all this stuff up, and yes, you are a powerful person and quote unquote, you're strong, but enough is enough.
Yes.
And so I think for women, the other thing that I was witnessing and experiencing is that when there were lots of women who couldn't or wouldn't speak up or talk back. I wasn't one of those. I just was like, whatever.
Found the most audacious podcast you'll find on the internet. Of course, this is the Audacious Living Podcast, and as always, it's an absolute pleasure to continue our ongoing goal of helping our listeners live their best audacious lives ever. You are tuning in to episode 218 of the podcast, and it continues to be my pleasure to deliver great content and really deliver in a manner that will help individuals get to that better place. And today's episode is no exception. Kelly Charles Collins joins me on this edition of the podcast, and she was an absolute delight to speak with. And after practicing law for almost 25 years, Kelly made the bold and audacious decision to retire from her practice and shift her attention and focus on helping others. One of the things that became evident to her after working in a male-dominated profession in the law industry for so long was the lack of respect that women received in the workplace, as well as the fact that their voices, were oftentimes being silenced, which in turn, really what they did was erase their value. This was a huge issue for Kelly, who has always been a passionate advocate for inclusive cultures, where every person had a voice and everything that they had to say mattered. So she moved into the field of empowerment with a focus on helping women. I absolutely love the mission, and I'm certain that you will love hearing from Kelly as well. So without any further ado, here's my chat with Kelly Charles Collins. Enjoy. Hey, Kelly, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. It is such an honor. It's a treat. It's a privilege for you to be here today. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Audley, thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very excited to be here with you.
Oh, this is so good. This is so good. We spend so much time on this podcast engaging in conversations around how individuals can live their best audacious lives and the things that they can do and the individual steps they can do to put themselves in a better place. And so to have you here to engage in this conversation, and I know you do a lot of work in the field, in the realm of women's empowerment as an example, and I couldn't think of anything more audacious than that. It only makes sense to have you here. So perhaps as a starting point, we can get you to talk about you and the work you do and how you.
So women's empowerment for me, it's funny. It's so funny. When I was a little girl, and even when I was a teenager, I never wanted to hang around women. I was always with the boys. I was like the biggest tomboy when I grew up in Miami, and there was a space in our high school where all the boys would line up, and they had on their corduroys and their lumberjacks and their boots. And that's how I started to dress. And I would hang out with them all the time. But as I've gotten older and, just really watching what's happening in the workplace and being a lawyer, I'm a retired lawyer. So I practiced law for over 24 years. What I realized in just going through that profession and being in a male dominated profession, I started to see, what was really happening with women and our voices being silenced, our value being erased, just not being respected. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen, because I was raised by very strong, women, right. My mom, my aunts, my sister, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And so I was like, we often talk about, somebody should do something. Somebody should fix that. And I just decided that I'm that somebody. right? And so one of the things that I did when the pandemic happened was, that's when I was transitioning out of the full-time practice of law into full-time entrepreneurship. And I started thinking about women lawyers and thinking, we really need a place to come together. And it's funny, I put together a whole retreat, whatever, and there was pushback from them. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. But I didn't want that to stop me. So, you were talking about making these bold choices. And I was like, so what is it really that you want to do? And what I really wanted to do was to just create a safe space for women to be able to ask for what they wanted, ask for what they needed without all the fluff and the structure and all the stuff about networking. And so I created this community called Ladies Who Leverage. At the time, it's kind of on pause right now, but I created this community and brought together over 1,000 women to be able to just do exactly that, be in a safe space to explore who they were and what it is they wanted to accomplish.
Gotcha. Tell me what was happening, as you said, you 24 years practice. What was happening for women in the law field, in the practice 24 years ago?
Blatant disrespect, sexism, just, discrimination, all of it. Me personally, I experienced all of that, right? So from what could seem mundane in terms of, and maybe not so bad in terms of like going to court and introducing yourself as the counsel of record and having the judge look you directly in your face and ask you, where's the lawyer? Like, where's counsel? Right? Walking into courtrooms or walking into a courthouse and watching all of your white colleagues be able to go through security without being asked for ID or anything, and being stopped and asked for your bar card. Right. Having my male colleagues get in my face and, yell at me and say things to me and tell me to shut up and all these things. Right. And I watched this over and over. And for me, I had, it took time, but I had developed this sense that you don't have to like me.
But
you're going to respect me.
Right.
And so I just got to the point where I was like, y'all just gonna have to buckle up when it comes to me. And
I would imagine, sorry to cut you there, but I would imagine that as you're sort of going through this, you're like, this isn't right. Like, like we all know that sense of right and wrong. We were raised with these set of values that say how you treat people and interact with people. So as you're going through this, you must be feeling, this isn't how it's supposed to be, regardless what realm we're playing in. Here.
And you're pissed, right? So let's just
add to that. You're not feeling really good about yourself, right?
Let's tell the truth and shame the devil, that you're really angry because here it is. We've all been to law school, right? So and people can address, attach this to any profession. So you've all been through whatever it takes to get there. So for us, law school, taking a bar exam, and actually being, hired to practice and being in court, and then having people want to degrade you and discount who you are. And so it's frustrating. It's angering, right? You get pissed. I remember one day that it got so bad that I just, how in Jamaica we say, pressure bust pipe. And one day it was just that. And I had enough.
Pipes bust.
Pipe bust. And I just started bawling. Which was so different from what the people who I worked with, they were mortified and terrified because they didn't know what was happening. But I think people don't understand that you build all this stuff up, and yes, you are a powerful person and quote unquote, you're strong, but enough is enough. And so I think for women, the other thing that I was witnessing and experiencing is that when there were lots of women who couldn't or wouldn't speak up or talk back. I wasn't one of those. I just was like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But I also knew that I had to do that in certain instances because I needed them to know, and I needed the women to see that somebody would stand up for them and also just stand up to maybe give them that kind of power and confidence to be able to do that, and to let the men know that that's not how this goes.
Got you. Got you. So I guess in part of your work, and I think this leads nicely into the idea of inclusivity and I know cultivating safe workspaces is again up your alley. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, so for me, that looks like disrupting our biases. It looks like intervening, right? Safe bystander intervention. It looks like being able to effectively engage in conversations, right?
Yes.
And so those are the types of things when I'm talking to leaders and employees, that's how I help them to really create these spaces where every person matters, where every voice really matters. And if you're talking about, when you're talking, and women are obviously in those spaces, so really getting them to understand. So part of what I do when I'm talking about myself as a corporate trainer and helping women in those workspaces, I have what's called the V-suite, where women own their vision, voice, visibility, and value. And it's getting them to understand that they do have the power. I believe that women are powerful at their core. And so you do have the power to really create your vision and to really design your own legacy.
Yes.
And one of the tools that I use to help them do that is my book, Unapologetic AF, which is 34 Ways to Unleash Your Inner Badass. And for me, what it is I share what I call my Kellyisms. So my 34 Kellyisms for how I've gotten through a lot of these things. So they're really short, just like you can get in and get out when you're reading them. But just helping people to understand, helping women to understand, right? Know your value, demand your value, demand your worth, unleash your badassery, things like that, right? Sit, don't stay. Just all these little things that I've really internalized in my life and leveraged in my life to get through the spaces that I've been in and to be able to successfully navigate, especially male-dominated situations.
Just because I like the way it sounds, give me the title of your book again, please. That was awesome.
Oh, Unapologetic AF, 34 Ways to Unleash Your Inner Badass. It's on Amazon.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. And again, all important stuff, Kelly, like in terms of, getting women to own, as you said, their badassery and recognize that the powers within it. And oftentimes that's the biggest hurdle for people to understand that, that power that I feel I don't have, and that power that it's right here. It's just a matter of me sort of unlocking that potential, if you will, and making it happen. I want you to sort of talk about some of the things that people can do to unlock that potential.
So one of the things that I think is really important is for you to create the vision, because I think a lot of us live life and have been living life on somebody else's story, somebody else's playbook or storybook, right? So we were talking before we got on, and we're both Jamaican. And so we, as Jamaicans, they tell us basically, you're going to go to school, you're going to get your education, right? You're going to do these things.
Yes.
And so many other people are in that space. And so we continue to live out life that way. So I think one of the first things to do to reclaim your power is to create your own vision for your life. Like, what does that look like? Whether, personally, professionally, financially, just being free. Like, what does that look like for you? So that you can then take the steps that are necessary. So like when I'm talking about like the V-suite, right, for women, first thing we have to do is create the vision, because you need to know like where it is that you're going. Where are you going today? Where are you going in the next 3 months, next year, and the next 3 years? Where are you going? So that you can reverse engineer. And part of the reverse engineering is the other three things, which are your voice, your visibility, and your value. So what do you need to do with your voice? Are you somebody who has been, just keeping silent? Are you just somebody who's like, okay, I'm just gonna let that go, right? Are you somebody who's been outspoken, but not strategically or intentionally, right? So it's not getting you anywhere. So you got to make sure, right? Are we leveraging your voice the right way? And then being visible, right? What does that mean for you? Not everybody wants to be out and about everywhere, all over social media, but you do have to be visible in some way. So you get to direct that. So once you know the vision, you get to direct how visible you are, where you're going to be visible, and be able to optimize your presence. And then finally, like understanding your value. We often talk about, self-worth. And I think sometimes what happens is putting worth, like not understanding that there's worth and then there's value. Nobody can ever pay you what you're worth, and your self-worth is priceless, right? But there's a value that you have in the workplace. There's a value you have in your relationships. There's a value you have in your community, and really taking stock to understand who you are and who you want to be, again, in alignment with the vision, allows you to then define that value and then demand it. So that's what I would say.
The value, it goes right. No, the value is key in all this, right? Understanding what you're worth, and it starts with you inside here, right? And once you have that, then you can. It's almost, I was gonna say, confidence is another piece of way it maybe builds your confidence, rather, right? It allows you to feel that you can make that step, have that courageous conversation, like it can, make you do those sorts of the wonderful things that we need to do for ourselves. I mentioned courageous conversation. I mentioned that, and again, that's another area, topic that you discuss. So perhaps we can define, when you talk about what courageous conversation, because I want to make sure we're on the same starting page. And then, why is it important that we have them?
Yeah, absolutely. So a courageous conversation is simple. It is a conversation about a difficult or a sensitive topic. And the reason why we say courageous is because those conversations, sometimes they're heated, right? There's a lot of emotion around it. So it takes courage to be able to step into that type of conversation, knowing that things could go awry, that things could go wrong, that you could, maybe mess up a relationship. You could say something the wrong way. You could offend someone. So it just takes courage to be able to step into that, basically into that container, and say, I am going to address this issue. And the reason why we need to have these conversations is because what I know is what we ignore festers. So as a former employment law trial attorney and representing organizations, and watching what was happening with their employees and their leaders and everybody not speaking, and what the thing I always say to them is, listen, they're not talking to you. It doesn't mean they're not talking. They're not talking to you, but they're talking to attorneys. They're talking to EEOC. They're talking to TikTok, right? They are talking. And so it's so vitally important that these conversations be had, because I always say this, conversations change things, right?
Yes.
There are so many misperceptions, misunderstandings that could be clarified by just saying, hey,
that's right.
You said this to me, or I got this email. What did you mean by that? What I got was this. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Oh, no. Right. Now, obviously, I always talk about intention versus impact. And so the intention was, not to harm, but the impact could have caused harm. So, but then having a conversation around that allows you to diminish the impact in some way, right? And to not allow it to continue time after time after time, or to fester, right? Because it is going to, it's not going to go away. Ignoring it's not going to go away. So it's vitally important for us to have these conversations, but also to know the reason that I focus on courageous conversations, and now developed this whole thing called the Convo Catalyst Experience, and created a card deck and writing a new book about it, is that communication is an art and a skill.
Yes.
Right. And so there is a way to have these types of conversations so that you don't end up causing collateral damage. So it's not just like jump on in because I want to have this conversation with you, made me mad, or, I need to set you straight, or whatever it is. Sometimes it is that, but how you do it, right, is going to determine whether or not you get the outcome that you were seeking.
Got you. When I think of courageous conversations, the part that almost always makes me smile is the before and after. And when I say that, I mean, before the conversation, there's anxiety, there's, I'm uncertain, there's all these emotions. And then you enter into it. And oftentimes, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but oftentimes it wasn't that bad. Yep. Oftentimes, it's just a matter of clarification. Oftentimes, the two sides had different perspectives and didn't recognize what was going on. And oftentimes, it wasn't as bad as you thought it might have been.
That's right. So, one of the things that I think about, and I've always thought about go to your point about, going into the conversation, like, being very, afraid or, like, I don't know what's going to happen. And then having the conversation, being like, that wasn't so bad.
Right.
So, what I work with my clients on is really understanding that there is a framework for being able to do that, right? So when I say that it's an art and a skill, I developed what's called the perfect framework. So it has the 3 phases of prepare, engage, reflect. So if we think about this conversation that we are so afraid to have, right? But like we've known we've had to have it for a long time. If we start to think about, I always tell them, if you remember nothing else that I tell you about this framework, remember, like, why do you want to have the conversation, right? So in the prepare phase, there's different things that we think about, but 2 of the really important factors are, why do I want to have this conversation? So what is the intention behind it, right? So is it to clarify something? Is it to set somebody straight? Is it to give somebody feedback? Is it to get performance improvement? Like, what is the real reason that you want to have this conversation? And then second, what is the objective? So what do you hope to get out of the conversation? How do you want to feel when you leave? How do you want the person to feel when they leave, right? Because Maya Angelou said that you could say everything, but they're going to remember how you made them feel, right? And so those 2 things, I call them the bookends. Okay. So if nothing else, if you think about those 2 things, right? And in preparation, also like understanding, doing your research and having information that you need to have and checking yourself, like checking what's happening with you about why you want to have this conversation and are you ready to have it, right? And then in the engagement phase is understanding that this is a dialogue. This is not a debate. Right. And just like you were saying, some people, you all have your own perspectives. And maybe when you come together, you're like, oh, now I get it. Right. Or you're like, I hear what you're saying, but I still don't agree. Right. So having a dialogue doesn't mean that you're going to agree. Right. The agreement could be, I agree to disagree. But it's a way for you to exchange information. Right. And so in that conversation, also understanding, like minding your manners and not being defensive and not trying to deflect and not trying to, justify things, but really being open and actively listening in the conversation. And then once you're finished with the conversation, to really reflect on it. Yes. Like what went well, what didn't go well, making sure that if you, gotten information that's confidential, that you're not out there like, oh, listen what I heard, that's what I, and out there just putting it in the streets, like, here's the tea for today. No, that's not what we do. Right. So just, ensuring that you're not causing collateral damage. Yeah. So you've done the work, right? You've gotten this person to engage with you. Now don't go mess it up. Right at the end of it.
The part which I think is a nice bow to everything about courageous conversations is what this conversation does for the next one, right? And what the next one does, it gives you confidence and it gives you the ability to say, okay, I can do it again. And what that does, it creates momentum, right? You go, okay, and then it's almost like, well, I did it before, do it again.
Yeah, and it just becomes part of who you are and what you do every single day, just like everything else, right? It becomes a habit.
Right. So there you go. So take that launch and make that, make that first step, which again, what we promote here often on the podcast. Got to talk about being a disruptor and how we disrupt our biases. I know you said that early on, and that's a big one when we talk about empowerment. There's a lot of biases out there that have the ability to impact where we go in life or how far we go in life or how we feel about life. So I wonder if you can sort of talk about the role that we all can play as disruptors.
I think the first thing we all have to do is understand that we each have implicit unconscious bias, right? Yep. All of us do. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a human being. What the problem with unconscious bias is the way that it impacts the way that we interact with other people and the decisions that we make about other people and how that impacts negatively, for the most part, impacts their lives, right? And so first, we have to be cognizant of our own biases. What are those? So one of the things that, when I'm training my clients, one of the things that I talk about is just look at what your first impressions are, because people will say, well, it's unconscious. I don't know. How am I supposed to know? Look at your first impressions. When you meet somebody for the first time, what are you paying attention to? what is it that you decide immediately? Like, this person is this person comes from here, this person must live here, they must not be, they must be, right? Look at those things and decide, because that will tell you, like, okay, these are the things that immediately hit me, because your unconscious biases are your snap judgments. It's the things where you're not taking any time. Your brain is just like, okay, we have this situation, react, right? There's no conscious thought there. And so those things are based on what you've heard, read, seen, and experienced in your life, whether they're negative things or positive things. And so if you start to think about that, easy example, ever been on a plane? Basically, if you've been on the Southwest plane and you get the C, card, and you have to go now sit in the middle seat. And as you're walking down the aisle, who are you looking at and deciding whether you're going to sit in this middle seat or that? They're all middle seats.
Right.
So if you're going to sit in the front or the back, what are you looking at in the person sitting in those seats to determine whether or not you're going to sit there? Those are biases, right? And your biases are not just about race and gender. So oftentimes we think we don't want to talk about these biases, and we don't want to acknowledge that we have them, because we're thinking, if I say I have a bias, then I'm an ist or an o, a racist, a sexist, a xenophobe, a homophobe. No, you're just human.
Right.
And you could be biased about a lot of things. You could be biased that I'm Jamaican. Right.
But such an important point that people are going, oh my gosh, I'm a bad person, or and that's not it at all. I think by virtue of the fact that you're recognizing the bias, you're on the right path.
That's right. That's right. And then, part of it, so it's one thing to raise the awareness, right, and understand that you have biases. It's another thing to be willing to disrupt them, right, and doing the things that are necessary. And one of the easiest ways to disrupt your biases is to breathe, right? Because if you are making a decision, if you have to react to something, if you breathe, what happens is now that you engage the conscious part of your brain, because it slows down. Now you can act on facts, not fiction, which is what I say, right? So now you can really start to think about it. Another thing is to have conversations, ask questions, because we assume a lot of things about a lot of things.
We do.
Right? And if we just ask a question, be nosy if you need to, right? Then it will clear up a lot of those misperceptions that we have.
Curiosity definitely can break down any form of judgment without question. That's right. And again, and I mean, if you're naturally being curious about something, because oftentimes when you start to ask people, why do you think what they think, they're not even sure, and because it's a judgment of some sort. So the more questions you keep asking, the more you uncover stuff.
Or it's a bias that they have that's ingrained because of where they come from or their family, or that's just all the way it's always been told to them. That's what they've learned. That's what they've seen. That's what they've experienced. And so until you can counter stereotype, until you can learn differently, and our brain is so beautiful because it's malleable, right? So just because you have this thought today doesn't mean you'll have that thought tomorrow. If you get new information where you take it in and you're like, oh, let me analyze that. And like, okay, yeah, I do want to. No, I have now a shift. So yeah, it's the awareness and the willingness,
right.
To put yourself in a space to be able to change if you need to. You don't always have to, right? But if you have that desire to do that.
I remember hearing a story once that you said, ask questions on unconscious bias. I remember hearing a story once. A young girl told a family tradition of how they made turkey, and basically what they did is they cut the legs off of the turkey and sort of put it in a pot beside. And this is what the young girl saw her mother do, and then when she had her own family, she did the same thing, and the tradition carried on the way through. And it wasn't until someone was asking the questions like, why does this happen? They realized that it was because the pot was too small. And that was the reason why. But as opposed to thinking, oh, this is what we do because it's supposed to be done. But again, it's when you ask these questions and when you start to figure, why do you do what you do? You realize oftentimes it's just, whatever. I did not, there's no real reason.
It was just always that way. I don't know.
And again, as fun as a cute little story, but I think that applies to so many aspects of our world and our life, whether it be in the workforce, the professional, our personal, wherever, that these things happen. We don't question them, we accept them, and we operate accordingly. Yeah. So I wonder if we could sort of talk about the importance of really challenging. And I think sometimes people say challenge, they think it's an aggressive, forceful manner, but simply challenging for the sake of understanding.
Yeah. Because that's one of the things when I do talk about in disruption is challenging your assumptions.
Yeah.
Right. So if we see somebody, like we all have these stereotypes, right? We know them and we're all just like, no, I don't have them. But we know that they're there, right? Black men are lazy, they're criminals, white men can't jump, women can't drive, Asians are, good in technology, Muslims are terrorists, they're all out there.
Right.
Where does that come from? It comes from the information, right, that's around us.
Yes.
And so we have to start to not just always accept what the example that you just gave about, like, why'd you cut off the ends of the ham, right? Because that's just the way it's always been done. Well, challenge that. Like, why? Listen, we got this ham. Like, why are we wasting? What's wrong with this piece of the ham and this piece of the ham? Oh, because we needed a bigger pan. Oh, well, then we just go get a bigger pan and not waste food, right? So it's that thing about not just because it's always been that way, or that's what I've always known, or that's the space that it comes from, whatever. No, challenge your assumptions. So if you see someone else, going back to your first impressions, if you see someone, walking down the street and they're, disheveled or whatever, or if you see somebody who's homeless and, they're out there talking to themselves, or they look unkempt, a lot of us will make an assumption that, oh, they must be on drugs, they didn't save their money. No, you don't know that that's what you're assuming, that because of the position that you see them in, right? So now this is your first impression. Go ask them, hey, how'd you end up being homeless? You'll learn all kinds of stuff. Some of them, some of people out there have homes. But there's just something, maybe it's a mental illness or something that's happening and has them out there. So we have to really, and it is, challenge those assumptions, right? Because unconscious bias is disruptive. And hurtful too. And so you can't just be like, oh, no, challenge. And it's not an aggressive thing to say challenge. We do challenges all the time. So, challenge this or. But in this space, it is something that you have to do. Like, you have to willingly be reflective and be willing to just say, Kelly, maybe that's not right. Maybe I am making up stuff about that. Maybe that is an assumption. Maybe that is a stereotype, right? Maybe I do have a bias.
Obviously, clearly I lost my train of thought, but that's okay, because I do know that when we talk about unconscious bias, that's what we were talking about, unconscious bias. They have to be challenged, and they have to be done in a manner that allows us to be able to still maintain our dignity, because it's very, very, very important throughout this. And the other thing that is important to note is that we might stand alone. Right? We might be the only one standing up, speaking up, or even asking those questions. And that's not always easy, right?
No.
To be the only one on the island kind of a deal. Yeah,
but when you do it, it gives other people permission. Right. So sometimes we're just waiting for that one person to be that person. You don't want to be the first, but you would be the next, right? Because you want to see what's going to happen. But I think if we all think about being, like, oh, well, I'm going to be the person, I'm going to be, there's a quote that says, I wish somebody would do something about that. But you are that somebody, right? When are you going to understand that you are that somebody? We're always looking for somebody. You are that somebody.
By virtue of the fact that you're questioning it, you're one step there, right?
That's right. And so just, yes, there's going to be bumps and bruises along the way, and you may take a hit for it. But it's really important to. It's just really important to stand up, right? It's important to speak up, because, there's that other quote when first they came for, I always say them, because it's like, first they came for them, then they came for them, right? What happens when they now come for you? There's not going to be anybody else, because you didn't stand up, right? And we have to understand that the them is us.
Yes.
Right. Even if
Yes.
you think like, I don't, I'm a Black woman. And then over here, we're talking about somebody who is, transgender, or somebody who's Jewish or whatever. I'm like, that's them. No, that them is you. And if we watch what's happening in society right now, you're starting to see that, yeah, just like you were thinking you were protected and you were okay and your little, microcosm of the world. No, everybody is them. And when they're ready to come for them,
Yes.
understand that them one day is going to be you.
Yeah. You could be next. That's awesome. Kelly, this has been a marvelous chat, such a delightful time. And again, when I think of sort of the themes of this podcast and how important it is for us to encourage people to take that first step forward, to do the remarkable things they're intended to, just how impactful that can be. And you mentioned earlier, and I didn't touch on it, but I do think it's important that we touch on it, because we take that first step, we do give permission to others to do the same. And I can't underscore that enough, how significant that is. And so you think of that individual that they wanted to launch their own business. Hey, you want to retire from law to go into launch something brand new. I bet you there was a moment where you had that feeling in your stomach where you're just like, and you sort of questioned a bit and you weren't sure, and you said maybe, like, oh, I'm not sure, but you did it anyways. Yeah. And because you did it anyways, well, there you go, right? Well, because you did that anyways, we're having this conversation today. That's right. And someone is hearing us going, oh my gosh, Kelly's dropping some jewels today on the Audacious Living Podcast. Or maybe in your own work, you've been able to impact someone in a positive way and give them encouragement to try something and launch out. So I can't stress enough the importance of us taking that first step, regardless if we can't see the staircase in front of us, regardless if we don't know what's going to happen next. Go with it. Well, I love it. You'll be all right.
You'll be all right. And here's the thing, like, life takes detours. It's not linear. And so even when, I made the transition, you think about, like, I'm leaving a steady, good paycheck to then, be reliant on other people really, figuring out there's no real rhyme or reason to when the money is coming. And, and then having to make decisions and creating things and seeing that that's not really working, and revamping and getting rid of and, starting again. But like you said, to be able to be, I've had the opportunity in the last year to help 17 experts develop their messaging so that they can go get paid to speak. And I've, now on my 5th book about to be published, and, I've spoken to tens of thousands of people and had, trained them across the world. And, I've traveled, across the country to speak, and I've been on, numerous podcasts, and I've been on TV, and I've been published in magazines and Time and all the kinds of things. Right. And like you said, had I stayed in the comfort of the practice, right, which I could have done easily, had I stayed there, none of these things would happen. So you just got to go for it.
Go for it. And the people you impacted are appreciative of that, I'm sure. I'm sure they are. Kelly, for our listeners who want to learn more about you, catch up with you, where can we send them?
Send them to kellycharlescollins.com.
Awesome. Kelly, this has been great. Such a delightful treat. I thank you for taking the time like this, and congratulate you for all your great work. And all I can say is continue doing your thing.
I will. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Back we are here on the podcast.